In this video, we're going to look at different mechanisms for evolution. And we're actually going to be considering what is evolution fundamentally, and we need to think about the population and how the changes are occurring in the alleles. In other words, we're looking at changes in the gene pool, so the frequency of the alleles represented in all the different individuals in a population. And there are several different ways that the gene pool can change. One way is through non-random mating, so where different organisms select a mate in different ways, and that could also be termed as sexual selection. Another way that we've been thinking about recently is mutation. So changes in the alleles are really obvious if you mutate that allele. We also need to consider genetic drift. This is random changes in populations, not necessarily caused by anything in particular, but just who got chance to mate that time round and therefore pass on their alleles. We can also think about migration. So the movement of an individual in or out of a population is going to bring with it or take away the alleles that are contained within it. And this is often also called gene flow. So the flow of alleles or genes into or out of a population. And the last thing, which we've met before, is natural selection. So preferential survival of particular collection of alleles based on the selection pressures that are happening. So let's have a look at each of these as we go. Mutation, you've got a population of beetles over here, all with little a. So the frequency of the little a allele is 1. And we've got a random mutation happening in the gamete formation, and now you have a new genotype. So a change in the gene pool, we've got evolution happening. If we have non-random mating, you can see how the offspring here of our little beetles, if it was these guys here, they are all going to be big A in the offspring and little a in the offspring. If you have mating that selects for the same, if you have mating that selects for different, then we're going to get different combinations of alleles, which means we'll get different genotypes, which means we could end up with different phenotypes, which will then influence other things like selection, natural selection down the line. Genetic drift. Genetic drift is what happens within a population, and it's just random changes in the allele frequency based on just who got lucky and who bred in that season. So in this example here, you can see that just 3 of the population, just for no particular reason, not because they were particular colour, but just they were the ones that got to breed that season, and therefore the next generation is all little a. So the frequency of the big A allele has dropped down to 0, so that means there has been an evolutionary change. So genetic drift is a movement of the allele frequency just based on random chance changes in terms of who can breed in that generation. Migration. This is a really cute little picture here. We have 2 separate populations, and they are separated by something. In this case, it's geographical. There's a hill in the way, but there has been migration or gene flow into the new population, and you can see the arrival of this little chap here is going to introduce a whole new load of options with his big A allele. So that's gene flow into a population, introducing a new allele, therefore changing the gene pool, and therefore allowing for evolution. And the last one is natural selection. So this is something you're very familiar with. This time it's a change in the allele frequency based on something that is responding to a selection pressure. And in this example, we've got our beetles sitting on a rock, and because the rock is dark, some of those beetles are really obvious and some of them are camouflaged. So the camouflaged little beetles get to survive. They are not eaten by the bird, and the ones that are eaten by the bird are less represented in the next generation, and their allele decreases in frequency. So it drops from 0.7 to 0.4 in the next generation. So that is a change in the gene pool directed by selection pressures, not random like we do with genetic drift. So there's several different ways to influence the gene pool of a population, which is the same as saying causing evolution.